Good morning, everyone. I am Robin Landsey and super excited to welcome you to our monthly Implementation Science Consultation Hub seminar, and which we co-sponsor with the UAB CFAR Behavioral and Community Sciences Corps. And we are thrilled to have Dr. Janet Turan, Director of the Behavioral and Community Sciences Corps with CFAR, as well as Director of the Sparkman Center, and professor in healthcare organization, and I'm sure a million other wonderful accolades, but we are so fortunate to have her today share with us about mixed methods and practical applications as we look to do this in our work in implementation science. So welcome, Janet.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me try to share my, whoops, wait, I did not do that right, just a second. Need to press the share screen thing, then open the file.
Yes.
There we go. Play from start. Slideshow. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, today I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about mixed methods research, and I'm going to sort of start out with a sort of general sort of introduction to mixed method research and what it is, and then get into some examples and in particular some applications in implementation science studies. And I'm sure you all can probably contribute to this discussion as well, so I'll look forward to some good discussion at the end. So just starting out to define mixed methods research. So this is an approach to inquiry that combines or associates both qualitative and quantitative forms. And it's got its own philosophical assumptions, and we always use both qualitative and quantitative approaches. And importantly, we mix and integrate those in our final interpretations and in as we go along in the study design. So it's more than simply collecting and analyzing both kinds of data. Sometimes we hear about multi-method studies. They've done some quantitative, they've done some qualitative. But if you really don't integrate them, then it's really not a mixed method study. And so I'll be going over later some of the study designs, but basically you're going to use both of these approaches so that the overall strength of the study is greater than if you had only done qualitative or only done quantitative research. And, you know, I like this slide is actually from Natalia Ivankova, and I like it a lot because it just shows the sort of the different strengths of qualitative and quantitative research, and how really to really fully understand an issue in depth, you really need to use both your quantitative brain and your qualitative brain. So, you know, this has been an evolving field of research. As you know, it's extremely popular and highly used in a lot of health research today. And it's when a single study, when the investigator collects and analyzes data, integrates the findings, and draws inferences using both qualitative and quantitative approaches in a single study or program of inquiry. So that's kind of a nice definition. And really, it's really almost a powerful third paradigm choice in research, because it really takes advantages of the strengths of both the quantitative and the qualitative perspectives so that we can get the most complete, balanced, and useful research results. So what are the core characteristics of mixed method research? So you need to collect and analyze persuasively and rigorously both qualitative and quantitative data. So both have to be done with the highest standards of rigor. You can't just do a a wonderful quantitative study and then do a focus group and just say, okay, I've done mixed methods research. Both have to be done to the standards of that tradition of research. And again, you need to mix the data either concurrently, if you're doing both types of data collection at the same time, sequentially, or embedding one within the other. And sometimes researchers give priority to one type of data. They may say, this is mainly a quantitative study, but we're also integrating some qualitative, or they might go the other way around, or they might say we're giving both types of research equal weight. Now, mixed methods research has now become, over the past 20 years, extremely accepted and widespread. You will find textbooks on mixed methods research. You will find mixed methods studies and reported in top and high impact journals. I would even say that you're more likely to get into a top journal if you do a mixed methods study. There are special journals that are specific to mixed methods research, journal issues, and a lot of the funding agencies are now publishing guidelines around mixed methods research, including NIH. So extremely widespread at this point. And so this is one of the more recent versions of one of the key texts by John Creswell, who's one of the gurus of health-related mixed methods research. And so he's got a variety of sources of books that you can find and get a lot of guidance. And this is just to show you that, NIH has a whole a webpage and a section on best practices for mixed methods research in the health sciences. Again, a lot of this was spearheaded by John Creswell. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of guidance. There are training programs. We have a certificate program at UAB. So it's really becoming a very, very popular research paradigm. So just to give you an example of how you could study a research topic from these three different paradigms. So say you have a study where you want to develop and test new HIV educational sessions for pregnant women in prenatal clinics. Now, in the first scenario, you might really just be focused on if these new educational sessions are effective in, increasing women's attendance at prenatal visits. And so if you're really just focused on effectiveness, then you want to do a quantitative study where you can actually show the effectiveness. But what if you just want to know really how the clinics are actually implementing these sessions? I mean, how do they do it? How do they explain it? What's the dialogue between the women and the educators? Then you might really just want a qualitative approach where you might use observations or interviews, different methods. But in a third scenario, you might both want to know how they're implementing the intervention and how they're doing it to achieve effective results. And so that might be a situation where you could use mixed methods quite efficiently. And so the rationale is that, when you use these in combination, both qualitative and quantitative methods, you get a better understanding of the research problem than either method could give on its own. And you can address a lot of different research questions too, both confirmatory and exploratory questions. And you can generate more valid meta inferences about your topic. So that's where we're really talking about inferences that you make based on integrated data. So when you integrate the things that you're finding from both qualitative and quantitative strands of a mixed methods research study, you can make meta inferences that are on a higher level. And so here's just, some examples of, and I'm going to go into study designs in a bit, but so examples of different types of mixed method studies. So for example, a researcher might collect data using quantitative instruments like a questionnaire, and at the same time do qualitative focus groups with members of the same population. And then they might want to see if those two types of data show similar results. Or another example could be a researcher is going to collect quantitative data using experimental procedures, but then they want to do follow-up interviews with a few individuals who participated in the quantitative experiment to help explain their outcome scores. I mean, how did they get these results? Another example could be a researcher who initially interviews individuals to really explore a topic in an open-ended way, but then uses those findings to develop a survey instrument or a questionnaire. This is a very common use of mixed methods. Then administers that survey to a sample, and then looks to see if the qualitative findings are actually generalizing to this larger population. Or here's an example of sort of a multi-phase study where the researcher might start out with qualitative data to determine what questions need to be addressed, then again design an instrument to measure the program impact, and then use that instrument to assess the impact of the program, and then conducts follow-up interviews to determine why the program did or did not work. And this to me sounds like a very sort of implementation science type of application. So what are the advantages to using mixed methods? It really does help us all talk to each other. It's a bridge between quantitative and qualitative researchers, and also encourages the use of multiple ways of seeing the world. And really the researcher is free to use all sorts of methods. And it can be very practical because, again, we use both numbers and words often to solve problems. And so when we can use both to understand our research problem, it's practical. Did I miss something? No, guess not. But there are some challenges in doing mixed methods research. And the first thing is the question of skills. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, you have to be able to do both types of research within your study with rigor and all the standards of that tradition. So you've got to have on your team really good experience with qualitative research, really good experience with quantitative research, and actually someone who knows how to do mixed methods research and integrate data. Another issue is that these studies can sometimes take a lot of time and resources. You've got to have the time to collect and analyze quantitative and qualitative data, the resources to do that, and again, the personnel and skills to complete the study. And this challenge is, I think, at this point, really not so much an issue. Maybe, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there would be convincing people that mixed methods research is really like a good thing. And so some people might question it. They don't quite understand it. They don't have time to learn it. And they're just not open to new approaches. But I think at this point, there's been so much done. We have a great track record, and you can easily convince people by locating and sharing exemplary mixed method studies, which are quite available. So, this is always, and I sit on NIH study sections and I review a lot of grants, and I see a lot of people that say they're doing mixed methods, but to me, as a mixed methods researcher, they don't meet all these criteria. So again, we have to ask these questions when we're looking at something to see if it's a real mixed method study. So did they collect and analyze both qualitative and quantitative data? Did they use rigorous methods in both these procedures? Importantly, did they integrate or combine the two data sources? And often we like to see them use a specific mixed methods design, which I'll talk about. And again, that has the merging of the two sources of data or having one build on the other or both. And the last is not you know, maybe not 100% always needs to be the case, but we often want to see the investigator frame the design within a theory or a philosophy. In this case of implementation science, usually these kind of things are framed in one of the implementation science frameworks. So now I am going to talk a little bit about the different designs. And there's some basic principles for designing such a study. One, you realize that as in the case with a lot of qualitative research, mixed methods designs, they can be fixed, everything can be kind of set beforehand, but sometimes there are emergent elements. You do some sort of data and then you realize that you need to add a qualitative component here, or you need to go back to step one and do something. So the design can evolve over time. You need to identify an approach to designing the study and really match the design to your research problem, your purpose, and your questions. And be very explicit about why you're doing mixed methods. Why do you want to do this? Why is it necessary to do this big study with all these different types of data collection? What will you gain? So you have to make a few key decisions. One, what is the level of interaction going to be between the quantitative and the qualitative strands of the research? What priority are you going to give to the different strands? The timing is key in the design. And again, where and how are you going to mix or integrate the strands? So there are some basic designs that are used in mixed methods research. And I'm really just going to talk today mainly about these three basic designs. There is a convergent design, or sometimes it's called a convergent parallel design. There is an explanatory sequential design, and also an exploratory sequential design. And then there are some more advanced designs that you can go to some of these sources and learn about how you sort of embed different types of strands of research in an intervention. There are some complicated multi-phase designs. So, but I think really just getting the key elements of the basic designs is most important. So, and when I talk about a design, I mean a plan for the study that includes all phases of the research. So the qualitative, the quantitative, the integration. And a method is more inside that plan. What is the specific method that you're going to use for data collection, analysis, and interpretation? So jumping into these, this is what is called the convergent parallel design, or similar names. And basically what you're doing here is that you are doing quantitative data collection and analysis pretty much simultaneously. At the same time, you're doing qualitative data collection and analysis. And then after doing the analysis independently, you bring them together, compare or relate the results, and then move on to interpretation and meta inferences. So this is a common design. And here's just one example. This is a study that was done in Thailand. And they were looking at knowledge, attitudes, values in relation to sex and sex education for teenagers in Thailand. And so they used a concurrent parallel mixed methods design. And so they did narrative interviews with key stakeholders, analysis of key policy documents, and focus groups to really explore the issues around sex and sex education in depth. At the same time, or around the same time, they were doing a large survey data collection, questionnaire surveys of 2,300 teenagers and hundreds of parents. And so they analyzed these separately with thematic analysis for the qualitative data and a statistical analysis for the quantitative, and then combined them. And their rationale was that they wanted to combine in-depth information from the qualitative methods with the statistical associations from the quantitative data and hopefully get a more comprehensive understanding of the issues. That's an example. Now we're going to move to the exploratory sequential design. And I know, oops, there it is. I think Dr. Natalia Ivankova is kind of moving away from some of these labels for the designs. It's a little confusing, the exploratory and the explanatory. But I was schooled in this, so I keep with this. And so for me, it's easy to remember exploratory, you're exploring, so qualitative comes first. So you start out with your qualitative data collection analysis. Then based on that, you follow up with quantitative data collection analysis. And then you again bring them together at the interpretation stage. And so here's an example, a study of food insecurity and hunger in Peru. And so this was a mixed method study that wanted to adapt and use a scale, a food insecurity and hunger module. And they wanted to measure that in urban and rural communities in Peru. But they felt that they needed to do some exploratory qualitative data before they could move to that quantitative stage. So they started out with in-depth interviews with key informants and focus groups with mothers, and really looked in depth at their perceptions and concepts of food insecurity. And that helped them to refine and adapt and change the scale and use it in a quantitative survey of households. And again, so here they wanted to use the qualitative information to help them adapt this quantitative survey measure and make it locally and culturally appropriate. So this is a very, sort of common use of mixed methods. And finally, the third kind of basic design is the explanatory sequential design. And so here you're starting out with a large quantitative data collection and analysis. And then what you want to do is use qualitative data collection to try to understand those quantitative results. Maybe you saw some associations in your quantitative data that aren't that straightforward or surprising. And so you can use the qualitative data collection to really dig in depth and understand what's going on. And then again, bring them together at the end for the interpretation. And so here, this is a study that we did in Kenya a couple of years ago. And we were really interested in why women in rural Kenya often give birth at home without assistance from a skilled birth attendant. And again, this is an explanatory sequential mixed methods design. So we started out with a large prospective study of over 1,000 pregnant women to look at the association of their baseline characteristics with where they subsequently gave birth to their baby. And then we saw that we got the results, we looked at the associations, and really used those to develop qualitative interview guides to explore these issues in depth with one-on-one interviews with women, male partners, traditional birth attendants, and community health workers. And in this case, we really wanted to get that in-depth information to understand and explain those associations that we're seeing in the quantitative data to get, of course, a more comprehensive understanding of the issues. I was just going to show, this is a diagram that we've been using in some of our grant applications to show mixed methods design. And this is, again, an explanatory design framework where the study started out with surveys and neurocognitive assessments. Then we analyzed those data using latent class analysis, causal modeling. And then there comes the first integration stage where we use those quantitative results to help us select a sample for qualitative research. And we also identify findings that need further in-depth understanding. With that, we went to in-depth interviews with participants and coded them and analyzed them using a thematic analysis approach. And then there's the final integration stage where we compare and contrast the qualitative and quantitative findings. So again, we know that when we're looking at these kind of studies, we want to see that they're collecting quantitative and qualitative data. The measures are persuasive and rigorous. They're integrating the two sources of data. And usually we want to see that they're using one of these designs and its associated features. And they have some sort of theoretical or conceptual framework that's driving the whole thing. And so, you know, it's good to use mixed methods language, like some of the language that I've been presenting here, because again, it shows that you are familiar with this tradition of research. And so I've been mentioning that integration is really a key feature of this type of research. And so when you're writing up mixed method studies, there are different ways you can do it and present it. You may, for each sort of topic or theme, you may present a quantitative result and then maybe the qualitative result, and then reflect on how they're similar or different. This is a kind of a table where, you know, you can see on the one side they've got the themes, and then in the next column they give the results from qualitative face-to-face interviews, and then in the next column they show the quantitative results from the survey. So it's really helpful both for the research team to lay it out like this, and also for when you're presenting results in a manuscript, for people to be able to see things side by side. And I hope this is not too small, but this is a recent manuscript published by Kaylee Crockett here at UAB, where she included a joint display of her qualitative and quantitative research findings. So that's similar kind of format where you've got themes. Here she included illustrative quotations from the qualitative data that represented that theme, and then quantitative findings that are along the same lines and can help us reflect on the quantitative associations. And then the last column is sort of the interpretation. When you take these together, what do they tell us about this theme? So now I want to switch a bit to talk more specifically about the use of mixed methods in implementation science. And again, there may be other people on this webinar who may even be able to share and know more than I do about this. But I do some implementation science studies, and I also review a lot of grants that are implementation science grants that use mixed methods. And so just as an example of how common it is right now in implementation science, this was from an article by Palankis and Cooper. 69% of D&I research grants funded by the NCI in 2010, 2012 plan to use both qualitative and quantitative methods. So again, it's extremely common in patient-centered research, in implementation science, in just a variety of health research areas. And what I see, and what you'll see too if you look at literature, is the qualitative piece in particular, and then in combination with the quant, is often used to identify barriers and facilitators to successful implementation. So you're doing an implementation science trial, you're scaling something up and looking at how it's implemented. You know, you can use qualitative and quantitative methods to look at the barriers and facilitators. You can also use mixed methods research to help you develop implementation strategies and conceptual models. You can use it to monitor the implementation process as you're going along. And really, use of mixed methods can help you enhance the likelihood of successful implementation and sustainment. So you can collect data along the way on implementation processes that can help you actually tweak your approach as you go along and be more successful. So in general, in these implementation science studies, qualitative methods are used inductively to examine the context and the processes of implementation with a real depth of understanding. So, we of course need to understand the inner and outer contexts when we're looking at implementation, and we also want to know in depth what are the things that affect the processes of implementation. And then quantitative methods are used then deductively to, examine the content and outcomes of implementation with breadth of understanding. So it's clearly a useful set of tools for implementation science studies. And I was going to share an example of, this is a study that's currently being conducted by Hannah Budwani in the School of Public Health and Department of Health Policy and Organization. It's her K Award study, and she's adapting and pilot testing a behavioral intervention that's meant to incorporate advances in HIV prevention in Black young MSM in Alabama. And so really the whole study is a mixed methods, kind of multi-phase progression. She starts out with qualitative research, so really trying to elucidate and understand the experiences, the beliefs, and the predictors related to HIV testing and HIV prevention services in this population. And she's interested in adapting an intervention called Brothers Saving Brothers, which was implemented in Detroit initially. So then the second aim is about adapting that intervention to include both rapid testing and PrEP to really also address structural barriers and be acceptable to that population. So she's using the data collected in aim 1 to really inform this adaptation process. And then aim 3 is the really, I guess, more of the core implementation science piece, is that she's doing a hybrid type 1 effectiveness implementation pilot study of the adapted intervention. And she's going to assess acceptability and feasibility of the adapted intervention using a lot of both quantitative and qualitative measures. She's going to estimate, it's a small pilot sample, but can estimate effects on HIV prevention outcomes. So very quantitative piece. And then also collect qualitative data on real world implementation. So there, in aim 3, again, she's doing a randomized pilot test with half randomized to either intervention or control. Then she's going to collect implementation data from the staff who implement the intervention, and also from study participants to assess how they experience and internalize it. So this is typically what I sort of see in implementation science studies, that they're using the qualitative methods within a larger implementation trial to really understand how the implementation worked. And a lot of the qualitative work that is embedded in these implementation science studies is, of course, grounded in one of these implementation science frameworks that you all use. So Hannah's study in particular was grounded in the EPIS framework. And I've seen a lot of that are, the qualitative is based on constructs in the CFR framework. So when they move to do the qualitative research, they really look to these frameworks to see what questions should we be asking in these qualitative interviews or focus groups or observations. We know we need to ask about the outer context of the intervention. We know we need to ask about the inner context. We need to talk about bridging factors and innovation factors. And so all these things really can provide a guide of the type of stuff that you want to ask that's really going to give you more integrated data about the implementation of this intervention. So I also wanted to just, there's quite a bit of mixed methods research coming out of UAB these days. And I'd say a lot of it is in the HIV space. You all can tell me, I'm sure there's a lot other going on as well, but these are some of the ones that I'm familiar with. And as I mentioned, it's really, you really do get more compelling and really exciting results when you can integrate qualitative and quantitative. And so these manuscripts have done very well. You need kind of a longer word count to accommodate both qualitative and quantitative results. That's another issue, but I think it's a really useful tool for the implementation science space as well. So I am gonna, just open it up to questions and discussion and other examples that people have. Oops, I did not mean to go there yet. So, mixed methods research can be pretty complex. It's demanding in terms of like the skills that you need, the team that you need, the time that you need. So it's, not to be taken lightly, but it really can result in really in-depth understanding of complex problems, complex systems, and how people experience the world. And so when you get that, you can really use it to develop, scale up, and sustain programs and services that really meet the real needs of those people. So I think mixed methods research has a lot to contribute to implementation science studies, and it certainly is. So I like to open it up now to any sort of comments, questions, or if people have any other really good examples of uses of mixed methods research and implementation science studies, I'd love to hear about it, or just any other comments or questions that people might have.
Thank you, Janet. That was awesome. I always love hearing you give presentations, and certainly I think your examples were wonderful ones. And some
I certainly will share the slides if someone asks that in the chat, but the slides are certainly, I will send them and they can be shared.
Awesome, thank you. And Joanne, we also will send you the recording as well. So we're recording, so we'll have the recording and the slides available. So thank you for that. Questions from others, or just sharing your examples? I know obviously all of you are implementation scientists and have the expert here to ask questions. I know Lauren's always good for a question.
Yeah, don't be shy. I know you all have some examples.
I was typing into the chat that I was waiting for others because I didn't want to dominate the space.
No, you're good.
Go for it.
Okay, I'll jump in. I do have an example, but again, I can share if others don't. Sorry about my voice. I've had laryngitis. So yeah, a couple of questions. I'm trying to figure out which is the most pressing. In terms of, I guess, some of the feedback I've gotten when I've attempted to do this, I am doing it now, and I'm curious how it will pan out. But some of the feedback I've gotten from some of my mentors has been, okay, this is way too much going on. And when you submit this to a journal, they're going to tell you to pull it apart.
Well, yeah, I mean, it often is a lot going on, and you have to be a little bit careful not to throw too much in there. But there are journals that, of course, specialize in mixed methods research. And so those are, very specific, and that's all they're publishing. But I have just found that, some of the top journals like PLOS Medicine or Lancet or, any that they actually really value this type of research. So I wouldn't say that would be a reason to
not,
you need to go to a journal that you see has published some mixed methods research. I would say if you went to a journal that you didn't see any mixed methods research in there, you might you might get that reaction, but I hope not.
So my next question is about, I think I've been a little nervous to kind of put everything I have into one publication. Like if when I'm reviewed, people are going to look and see, oh, did you get 2 or 5 pubs out of this or whatever, like part of me gets a little concerned with putting it all in one place. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I would just say, and there certainly have been times when we've broken stuff up, just because it is really hard to put all of it in one paper often, and you really want to, you feel like almost you're doing a disservice to one side or the other. But I think what I would suggest is that you can break up and do some separate papers, but maybe try to have one paper that's a true mixed methods paper out of your papers. So maybe choose one theme that really resonates in both qualitative and quantitative and would really benefit from that type of integration. So that's one approach you can use. But it's also, it's not the end of the world if you end up publishing the qual and the quant in separate papers. But it's also just, it's kind of a shame if you don't have the opportunity to bring them together in one paper in some way, I would say.
So last quick, I think this is a quick question, and then I'll open it up for others and can come back and share my example if no one else has one. As far as you mentioned, that was a really great example with the K. In that situation, would someone have kind of, when they introduce their whole K, proposal, would they call this an overarching convergent or explanatory or exploratory? Would they say that up front, and then they would, let me count the ways that it is this design I just said, like the whole proposal? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think, I'm trying to remember, I don't think she did. And I think she was more framing it in terms of implementation science and some other health behavior theory that she was using. And really, I think she mainly framed that third aim as a mixed methods aim, because that was where within that same aim, she was really bringing together qual and quant and integrating them. So again, I'm not saying, you could frame your entire study as a mixed methods, and then you just make sure that you're going to be clear about that design and talk about how you're going to integrate the data from the whole thing.
Got it. Thank you.
All great questions. Others with questions or examples from your own research that you'd like to share and get Janet's thoughts on?
Someone's asking in the chat, Samantha's asking about resources available that has compiled journals with recent mixed methods manuscripts. I don't. That is a good project for someone. And again, I feel like I see it in a lot of the major journals that we publish in these days. And again, the Journal of Mixed Methods Research is, of course, very specific one. You better make sure you get all your P's and Q's correct if you're going to try to publish in that journal. They'll be very picky about it.
Yes.
Good. Someone, Lauren's asking if the UAB certificate is available for people outside of UAB. And Samantha answers yes. I wasn't sure about that, actually. So yeah, we have a graduate certificate in mixed methods, which includes several different classes, including a class that I teach, which is more an introductory class really on qualitative, and then brings in mixed methods at the end. And then Dr. Ivankova has a series of more advanced mixed methods classes. There's also, I believe at University of Michigan, there is a postdoctoral fellowship in mixed methods research, which I have been a mentor on from time to time. And that's now where John Creswell is. And so that's another great program, very competitive, but a really great program if one can get into it.
So I have a couple of comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the great presentation. It was really excellent. So in
Thank you.
the University of Michigan, I just want to say that apparently they have seminars or workshops that one can sign up for. Some devoted to kind of dissertations, and then I think in September, they're offering some other things that are not necessarily focused on student dissertations. I think one of the problems in terms of mixed methods that was already alluded to, I think by Lauren, was the idea of space and which journals besides open access journals like PLOS ONE or PLOS Med, certainly the behavior. But I think one of the core issues for me is the presentation of the data, even in qualitative data only studies. I don't think researchers have given enough to put kind of conceptual frameworks or display their data in a graphic way. And by a graphic way, I'm not talking about tables. I personally am not a lover of tables where there's an example of an exemplar quote, et cetera, et cetera. So I wondered what your thoughts are, Janet, in move people either in just qualitative research or in using mixed methods to have more visual displays, graphics, that in some ways might also adjust the issue of space limits.
Well, I agree completely. I'm a big fan of conceptual frameworks and then using figures to illustrate conceptual frameworks, and then at the end, you know, maybe bringing the findings back into a figure, you know, a revised conceptual framework based on what you've learned in the study. I think figures can be really great. I like these joint displays that I presented for the mixed method studies because I think it makes it very explicit to see the themes, the quotations, the quantitative results. It really lays it all out in a nice way. You don't always see that in mixed method studies, actually, but and that's another way, you know, depending on how the journal has requirements in terms of tables and stuff. Sometimes you can save space by putting those quotations in tables. It's a tension because, you know, when we do just qualitative studies, we really like to present a lot of the quotations, the voices of people, to really get a sense of, you know, what people are really experiencing. And when you do go to a mixed methods manuscript, you've got to be much tighter. You've got to only present the key quotations. You've got to, you know, you don't have as much space. So it is a challenge, but I, you know, definitely some of the more behavioral research oriented journals, and again, as you say, some of the open access have that kind of space.
Thank you.
Lauren has another question. Lauren, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Sure. I was just asking kind of an in the weeds question. If you recall that slide where you presented the themes in the first column, is that the theme that emerged from the integration, or are you presenting like qualitative theme and then you're kind of confirming, or vice versa?
I guess it's more the integration theme. You know, we call it a theme, which sounds more like a qualitative term, but it's really the theme or inference that, you know, came out of this integration. And then we're showing the qualitative and quantitative, and then our sort of our reasoning behind the integration in the last column.
Okay, yeah, I'll give a quick example and maybe that can, I don't know that I know exactly what I'll do with it yet, but what I'm currently doing is, one of the questions I had was about quantitative studies. You had mentioned, I don't know if this is just your experience or kind of a rule, but you said kind of generally larger data sets. The study that I'm doing is not really a large data set, but we first did, so it would be explanatory sequential. We first did a quantitative study where we looked at predictors of PTSD in people with HIV and the life events checklist. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was interesting because the predictors were things that were these like amorphous, like undefined categories. For example, sexual assault was not a predictor, but other unwanted sexual experiences was, and things like severe human suffering, you know, impact of multiple events. And we're like, well, we need richer information to really.
What does this mean? Yeah.
Right. So then we did interviews and we scraped up 20. It was very difficult. And
did you choose those from the quantitative participants? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we did. And it was interesting because some of them got our intervention and some didn't. And so we're kind of looking at that as well.
Oh.
But what's come out of it is like these themes that really it's kind of like, oh, we accidentally studied complex PTSD. And so it's been really cool and I'm really excited. It's gotten really rich and I'm excited to publish on it. But as I think it's a really good example of this. I don't know that it's an example of IS like you asked for,
right.
Yeah, as I think about themes, the themes are kind of different that are emerging. And I've been kind of confused if I should organize, you know, this paper, even though it's going to be mixed methods, if I should organize it really by the questions from the LEC that we're trying to describe, or if we're coming up with this whole new thing to describe complex PTSD in people with HIV. So I don't expect you to have an answer for that, just kind of telling you what we're thinking through.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, and sometimes when we can you hear me? My internet's getting bad.
You're good.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes when we have those tables of the joint displays, there's sometimes where we have a result where we have something for qualitative and we don't have anything for quantitative because, you know, it didn't come out there at all, or, you know, and it's something that came out later in the qualitative or vice versa. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I did want to pick up on what you said is that in a lot of mixed method studies, like if you do the quantitative first, then you can select your qualitative participants from those people who did the quantitative. So you might choose people who were high on PTSD or people who were low on PTSD and try to get more information from those people. It's also possible sometimes to use a separate sample of just the similar population that, you know, you studied in your quantitative. So I've done that as well. But yeah, I'll be curious to see how you figure that out, Lauren, because it is challenging and could even be two different papers. One that's just going according to the constructs that you started out to measure, and then maybe a separate paper that really goes in depth on the PTSD part. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, this is the one, Robin, that I've pulled you guys into, so you'll hear about it.
So exciting. Awesome. Well, thank you, Janet. This has been amazing. Just always wonderful to have you, and excited to share your slides and the recording with our hub and our core. And just encourage you all also to come back next month on April 7th from 10 to 11. Dr. Samantha Hill will be presenting on clinical strategies where interdisciplinary and ancillary staff are not an abundant resource. So like how to get things done from a implementation strategy as well. So thank you again, Dr. Turan.
Great. Should I send my slides to Kalani?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. That was fun.
Thank
Hoping
you.
to have more dialogue about this. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Bye-bye.